It was one of those slow, golden afternoons in late spring, the kind where the sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows and making everything feel just a little softer. The mall wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Families drifted in and out of stores. Teenagers laughed near the food court, and the occasional baby stroller rolled past with a sleeping child tucked inside. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just another Saturday. Near the back of a mid-sized department store, tucked between the craft supplies and the school section, a 9-year-old girl stood quietly by a display of art kits. She wasn't causing a scene. She wasn't running around or knocking things over. She was just waiting. Her eyes kept drifting to a sketchbook with a watercolor palette tucked inside, a set she'd been saving allowance for, but hadn't quite reached yet. She'd asked her mom if they could look at it today just to see it up close. Her mom had smiled and said sure, then told her to stay right there while she ran over to the cosmetics aisle to grab something quick. The girl didn't mind waiting. She liked looking at the colors, imagining what she could draw. The ocean, her dog, the big oak tree in their backyard. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, hands clasped behind her back like she'd seen grown-ups do when they were being polite. She didn't touch anything. She didn't even lean on the shelf. She just stood there, small and still, lost in thought. But stillness, especially when it comes from a child alone in a store, can look suspicious to the wrong eyes. A new employee in the store's loss prevention team, someone still eager to prove himself, had been watching her for a few minutes. He didn't know her. He didn't know she'd come in with an adult. All he saw was a young black girl standing too long in one spot, glancing around like she was checking if anyone was watching. In his mind, that matched the profile of someone casing a place before stealing. He radioed security. Within minutes, 2 uniformed police officers arrived. They weren't from the mall's private security. They were actual city cops called in because the store had a direct line to the local precinct for high-risk shoplifting concerns. The officers walked in calm but alert, hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning. When they spotted the girl, they approached slowly. "Hey there," one of them said, voice gentle but firm. "You okay?" She looked up, startled. "Yeah," she whispered. "You here by yourself?" "My mom's right over there," she said, pointing toward the cosmetics section. She said to wait. The officers exchanged glances. They didn't see an adult nearby. They asked her name. She told them. They asked if she'd taken anything. She shook her head, confused. "No, I was just looking." But when they asked her to come with them to the security office just to clear things up, she hesitated. Her stomach twisted. Something about the way they stood, blocking her path, not smiling anymore, made her feel small in a way that wasn't about height. She took a step back. That's when the tone shifted. "Don't move," the second officer said, voice sharper now. "We just need you to cooperate." She froze. Her throat closed up. She wanted to explain, to call for her mom, but the words wouldn't come. Fear had wrapped itself around her voice like a tight rope. She nodded instead, eyes wide. They guided her by the elbow, not roughly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument, and walked her through the store. Shoppers turned to look. Some frowned. Others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. A teenager near the candy rack pulled out his phone and started recording, not sure why, just sensing something wasn't right. Inside the security office, a cramped, windowless room with a metal desk and 2 folding chairs. The girl sat down as instructed. One officer stood by the door. The other began filling out a form. They asked again if she'd taken anything. Again, she said no. They asked where her mom was. She said she didn't know. She'd been right there a minute ago. They didn't believe her. Or maybe they just didn't trust her word enough to check. Instead, citing protocol for unaccompanied minors suspected of theft, they pulled out plastic zip ties. "For your safety," one said, as if that made it okay. She didn't struggle. She just stared at her hands as they looped the ties loosely around her wrists. Not tight enough to hurt, but tight enough to say, "You're not going anywhere. You're not trusted. You're a problem." Outside, her mother was walking back, bottle of face cream in hand, already scanning the toy aisle for her daughter. She saw the empty spot. Her steps quickened. Then she saw the security office door closing. Her heart dropped. Captain Denise Holloway wasn't in uniform today. She'd worn jeans and a soft cotton blouse, her badge tucked in her purse along with her service weapon. Off duty, off the clock, just a mom running errands. But the moment she saw that closed door and the uneasy glances from nearby shoppers, every instinct she'd honed over 15 years on the force kicked in. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She walked straight to the door and knocked once, sharp, authoritative. When it opened, the officer inside barely had time to say, "Can I help you?" Before she stepped in, her eyes went straight to her daughter, sitting small in that chair, wrists bound, face pale, eyes glistening with tears she was trying not to shed. Denise didn't say a word at first. She just knelt in front of her, blocking the officers from view, and gently cupped her daughter's face. "Did they hurt you?" she asked, voice low, steady. "No," the girl whispered. But they wouldn't listen. Denise nodded. Then she turned slowly and stood up. She reached into her purse, pulled out her badge, and held it up without fanfare. "Captain Denise Holloway, Metro PD, that's my daughter. She was with me the entire time. She did not steal anything. And you had no right to detain her, let alone restrain her without verifying her story or contacting me." The room went silent. The officers' faces changed instantly. First confusion, then dawning horror. One stammered, "Ma'am, we didn't know." "I know you didn't." Denise cut in, calm but icy. "That's exactly the problem." She asked for the store manager. She asked for the security footage. She asked for the name of the loss prevention staffer who'd called it in. Every request was delivered in that quiet, controlled tone that veteran officers use when they're holding back fury. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. But everyone in that room knew. This wasn't over. While they waited for the manager, Denise knelt again and carefully cut the zip ties with a small pocket knife she always carried. She held her daughter's hands, rubbing the red marks gently. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Nothing at all. You were brave." Her daughter nodded, finally letting a few tears fall. "I kept saying you were coming." "I know," Denise said. "And I always come." When the manager arrived, a flustered man in a wrinkled polo shirt, he apologized repeatedly, offered store credit, promised it was a terrible misunderstanding. Denise listened politely, then said, "This isn't about store credit. This is about why a child standing still in your aisle was treated like a criminal before anyone even asked her name." She filed a formal complaint before they left the store, not just with the police department, but with the corporate office of the retail chain. She cited violations of juvenile interaction policy, racial profiling, and failure to follow de-escalation procedures. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it because she knew this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And unless someone with authority spoke up, it wouldn't be the last. As they walked out of the mall, hand in hand, the sun was lower now, painting the parking lot an amber light. Her daughter was quiet, still shaken. Denise didn't push her to talk. She just held her hand a little tighter. At home, over grilled cheese and tomato soup, her daughter's comfort meal, they finally talked. Not about blame, but about feelings. About fear. About how it felt to be seen as guilty before being seen as human. Later that night, after her daughter was asleep, Denise sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She reviewed the complaint draft one more time. Then she paused, staring out the window at the quiet street. She thought about all the kids who didn't have a police captain for a mom, kids who'd been through worse and had no one to file a report, no one to cut the zip ties, no one to say, "You did nothing wrong." She closed the laptop, but she didn't close the case, because what happened that afternoon wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, and patterns only break when someone decides to stand in their way. She knew her daughter's story wouldn't stay quiet, not because she wanted attention, but because truth has a way of finding its audience. And maybe, just maybe this time, someone would finally listen. The next morning came too soon. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, soft and ordinary, as if nothing had happened the day before. But inside the house, everything felt different. The air was heavier, quieter, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The girl sat at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around her bowl, not really eating. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the security office, the cold metal desk, the officer's stiff posture, the sound of the zip tie clicking shut. Her mom moved around the kitchen with careful calm, making coffee, checking her phone, folding yesterday's mail into neat stacks. But her eyes kept drifting to her daughter, watching for signs. The hunched shoulders, the way she flinched when the back door creaked open. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about what it left behind. A new kind of wariness in a child who used to run into stores without a second thought. By mid-morning, the phone rang. It was the police department's internal affairs unit. They'd received the complaint and wanted to discuss next steps. Her mom took the call in the living room, voice low but firm. She didn't yell. She didn't sound angry. But the girl could hear the steel underneath her words, the kind that said, "This isn't going away." Later over lunch, her mom asked gently, "Do you want to talk about it more?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know what to say." "That's okay," her mom said. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. But I need you to know something. What they did wasn't your fault. Not even a little bit." The girl nodded, but her eyes stayed on her plate. That afternoon, her mom sat down at the dining table with a notebook and started writing. Not a report this time, but a letter. To the store's corporate headquarters. To the city council. To the head of the local police union. She wrote about protocols, about training gaps, about how a child's race shouldn't determine whether she's believed. She wrote clearly, factually, but with a quiet urgency that carried more weight than shouting ever could. She didn't post it online. Not yet. She wanted to give the system a chance to respond the right way, through policy, through accountability, through change that lasted longer than a news cycle. But the system moves slowly. And the internet doesn't. 2 days after the incident, a short video began circulating online. It was shaky, filmed on a phone from across the store aisle, but clear enough to see everything. The girl standing alone, the officers approaching, the moment she was led away with her hands behind her back. In the background, barely noticeable at first, was a white boy, maybe 12 or 13, walking out of the electronics section with 3 unopened video games tucked under his arm. No one stopped him. No one even looked twice. The contrast was impossible to ignore. At first, the video got a few hundred views. Then a local parenting blogger shared it. Then a community activist. By the end of the week, it had been seen over 500,000 times. News outlets started calling. Not just local ones, national ones too. They wanted interviews. They wanted statements. They wanted to know, how could this happen? Her mom declined most of the requests. She didn't want her daughter's face on TV. She didn't want her trauma turned into content. But she did agree to speak with one reporter, a woman who'd covered police reform for years and promised to focus on policy, not spectacle. The interview ran on a Friday evening. It was calm, measured. Her mom sat in her living room wearing a simple sweater, no badge in sight. She spoke about de-escalation training, about implicit bias, about how even well-meaning officers can cause harm when they act on assumptions instead of facts. She didn't name the officers involved. She didn't call for their firing. She called for better systems, ones that protect all kids, not just the ones who look a certain way. The response was immediate. Some people praised her for her restraint. Others accused her of being too soft on her own department. A few online commenters claimed the whole thing was staged, a setup to attack police. But the majority, they were angry. Not at her, but at the pattern the story revealed. Parents wrote in saying, "This could have been my child." Teachers shared how they'd seen similar things in schools. Even retired officers admitted, "We've all seen this happen. We just didn't always speak up." Then came the store's response. A corporate spokesperson released a statement calling the incident deeply regrettable and promising immediate review of all security protocols. They announced mandatory anti-bias training for all loss prevention staff. They offered a public apology, though it came 3 days after the video went viral and only after their stock price dipped slightly. Her mom read the statement aloud to her daughter. "What do you think?" she asked. "It sounds nice," the girl said slowly. "But do they really mean it?" Her mom smiled faintly. "Actions will tell us that." Meanwhile, behind the scenes, things were shifting. The 2 officers involved were temporarily reassigned to administrative duty, standard procedure during an investigation. The loss prevention employee who'd called them in was placed on leave. The store manager was required to attend a community accountability session with local leaders. None of it was punishment exactly, but it was movement. What surprised her mom most wasn't the backlash. It was the support. Colleagues she'd worked with for years reached out, not to defend the department, but to ask, "How can we do better?" A sergeant from another precinct, sent her a research paper on juvenile interaction models. A dispatcher she barely knew messaged, "My niece is the same age. Thank you for speaking up." Even more unexpected was the package that arrived one Tuesday afternoon. It was wrapped in brown paper, no return address. Inside was the art kit, the exact one from the store, the one with the watercolor palette and the thick sketchbook. Tucked in the front pocket was a note. For the young artist who deserved to be believed. Keep creating. A teacher who's been watching. Her daughter held the box like it might vanish. She didn't open it right away. She just sat on the floor, tracing the edges with her fingers as if testing whether kindness could really show up like this. Quiet, unexpected, real. That night, she finally opened it. She laid out the pencils, the brushes, the little tubes of paint. Then she turned to a fresh page and started drawing. Not the ocean or the oak tree. She drew her mom's hands, strong, steady, cutting the zip ties. Her mom watched from the doorway, saying nothing, but her eyes shone. As the weeks passed, the media attention faded. News stories took over the headlines, but the work didn't stop. Her mom began meeting with a small group of parents, community organizers, and legal advocates who'd been pushing for youth protection policies for years. They'd been ignored before. But now, with a credible voice from inside law enforcement lending weight to their cause, city officials were finally listening. They drafted a proposal. A new ordinance requiring that any minor detained in a retail setting must have a parent or guardian contacted before any formal action is taken. No restraints for nonviolent situations. No questioning without an adult present. And mandatory training for both police and private security on implicit bias and child development. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was concrete, and it was enforceable. Presenting it to the city council wasn't easy. Some members worried about over-regulating businesses. Others questioned whether this was really a city issue. But her mom stood at the podium, calm and clear, and told the story, not as a captain, but as a mother. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said. "I'm asking for equal treatment. My daughter didn't get it that day. But maybe with this policy, the next child will." After the meeting, a councilwoman pulled her aside. "You know," she said quietly, "my grandson was stopped last year at a convenience store for buying a soda with a $20 bill. They thought it was counterfeit. He was 12. They made him wait outside for an hour until his dad came. I never said anything, because I didn't think anyone would care." Her mom nodded. Now they might. Back at home, her daughter had started going into stores again, but only if her mom was right beside her. She still glanced at security cameras. She still kept her hands visible. Old fears don't vanish overnight. But she was trying. One Saturday, they went back to the same mall. Not to the same store, they never returned there, but to a bookstore nearby. As they walked through the aisles, her daughter pointed to a shelf of sketchbooks. "Can I get a new one?" she asked. Her mom smiled. "Of course." While her daughter browsed, her mom stood a few feet away, giving her space, but close enough to see her to be there if needed. She watched as her daughter ran her fingers over the spines, comparing textures, flipping through sample pages. There was no fear in her movements now, just curiosity, just joy. Later, over ice cream at the food court, her daughter looked up and said, "Do you think other kids are still scared like I was?" Her mom didn't lie. "Some are. But we're working to change that. Will it work? I don't know," her mom admitted. "But we have to try. Because if we don't, who will?" The girl thought about that for a moment, then nodded. She took a bite of her cone, chocolate dripping down the side. "Okay," she said simply. "Then I'll help too." And in that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but in the story itself. It wasn't just about what had been taken that day in the store. It was about what could be built in its place. Awareness, action, maybe even healing. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be pushback, delays, people who'd rather pretend nothing was wrong. But the first crack had been made. And through it, something new was starting to grow. Not loud, not flashy, but real. Like a child's drawing on a fresh page, imperfect, honest, full of hope. Summer deepened, and with it came a strange kind of quiet. The headlines had moved on. The video stopped trending. The store issued one more statement, this time about ongoing improvements, and then went silent. But in the house where the girl lived, the work had only just begun. She'd started carrying her sketchbook everywhere. Not just to draw, but to remember. She filled pages with small moments. Her mom tying her shoes in the morning, the way sunlight hit the kitchen table at 3 p.m., the curve of a stranger's smile at the bus stop. It was her way of saying, I see you. You matter. After feeling invisible that day in the store, she decided to look harder at people, at the world, at the quiet kindnesses that often go unnoticed. Her mom noticed the change, not just in the drawings, but in how her daughter held herself. She still hesitated before entering new places, but now she'd take a breath, square her shoulders, and walk in like she belonged because she knew she did. Meanwhile, the proposal for the Youth Protection Ordinance was inching forward. City council meetings stretched into late evenings. Drafts were rewritten. Compromises were debated. Some business owners pushed back, worried about liability or slowing down security responses. Others, surprisingly, supported it, especially small shopkeepers who'd seen how fear could poison trust between neighbors. Her mom spent nights at the dining table, poring over legal language, consulting with civil rights attorneys, and texting late into the night with other parents who'd lived through similar moments. She wasn't doing it alone anymore. A network had formed, quiet, determined, made up of people who'd been told their stories didn't matter until one of them finally got heard. One afternoon, she got a call from the police chief. Not a formal summons, just a phone call, voice low, almost weary. I've read your complaint, he said. And I've watched the footage. You're right. We failed that child. She didn't say thank you, she said. Then let's make sure we don't fail the next one. They talked for nearly an hour about training, about accountability, about how even good officers can fall into bad habits when systems don't challenge them. By the end, the chief agreed to support the ordinance, and more. He'd mandate new de-escalation training for all officers, with a special module on interacting with children, especially those of color. It wasn't a grand announcement. No press conference. Just a quiet shift behind the scenes, the kind that rarely makes news but changes lives. At school, the girl's teacher noticed something too. She'd always been quiet, but now she spoke up more. In class discussions, during group projects, even at lunch when someone made a careless comment. She didn't argue. She just asked questions. Why do you think that? What if it happened to you? Her words were soft, but they landed. One day, the teacher pulled her aside after class. You've got a strong voice, she said gently. Don't be afraid to use it, the girl nodded. I'm trying. Back home, her mom found a new rhythm, balancing duty, motherhood, and this unexpected role as a bridge between two worlds that often didn't speak to each other. She still wore her uniform to work, still answered calls in the middle of the night, still believed in the possibility of good policing. But now she also carried a deeper understanding. That belief isn't enough. Systems need to change, or the same mistakes keep happening to different children. Then came the school assembly. It wasn't planned at first, but after the video went viral, the principal reached out. Would your daughter be willing to share her story? He asked carefully. Not to shame anyone, but to help our students understand what it feels like to be judged before you're heard. Her mom asked her daughter first. Only if you want to, she said, and only if you feel safe. The girl thought about it for 2 days. She practiced what she'd say in front of her mirror. She wrote notes, then tore them up. Finally, she said yes, but only if her mom sat in the back of the auditorium, just within sight. The morning of the assembly, she wore her favorite dress, the one with sunflowers, and carried her sketchbook like a shield. When her name was called, she walked to the microphone slowly, heart pounding. The room was full of kids her age, teachers, even some parents. She took a breath. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad, she began, voice small but clear. I'm here because I want you to know what it feels like when someone decides you're guilty before they even ask your name. She didn't describe the zip ties. She didn't name the store. She talked about waiting, about being scared to speak, about how her mom taught her that silence isn't weakness. It's just fear wearing a quiet coat. Then she said something that surprised even her mom. But after that day, I decided I wouldn't stay quiet forever. Because if I don't tell my story, who will tell it for me? The room was silent. Then, one by one, kids started clapping. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Afterward, 3 girls came up to her. That happened to my cousin, one whispered. He was just holding a soda, another said. I didn't know people got treated like that. The third just hugged her. That night, over dinner, her mom said, "You were so brave today." The girl shook her head. I wasn't brave. I was just tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's the kind of brave that changes things. As summer turned to fall, the ordinance moved to a final council vote. Supporters gathered outside City Hall. Parents, teachers, faith leaders, even a few shop owners holding signs that read, "Protect all kids and believe children first." Her mom stood among them, not in uniform, just as a citizen. Her daughter stood beside her, holding a handmade sign with a drawing of two hands, one small, one large, reaching toward each other. Inside, the debate was tense. One council member argued the policy would handcuff store owners. Another said it was unnecessary government overreach. But then a retired school counselor stood up during public comment and said, "I've seen too many children lose trust in adults because one grown-up assumed the worst. This isn't about stores. It's about dignity." When the vote came, it passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Afterward, reporters swarmed, but her mom only gave one short statement. "This isn't a victory. It's a beginning." That evening, they celebrated quietly. Homemade pizza, a rented movie, and the girls' favorite ice cream. No speeches, no cameras, just the two of them on the couch, wrapped in the kind of peace that comes after a long fight. But the ripple effects kept spreading. A nearby city reached out, asking for help drafting a similar policy. A national retail chain, not the one involved, announced it would adopt the same juvenile interaction standards across all its stores. Even the insurance company that covered the original store quietly updated its risk guidelines, adding failure to follow equitable detention protocols as a factor in liability assessments. No one made a big deal of it. But in boardrooms and precincts and school offices, people were paying attention. At home, the girl kept drawing. One page showed a classroom where every child's hand was raised. Another showed a store with a sign that read, "Ask first, assume nothing." And one, tucked near the back, showed her younger self standing in the toy aisle. Only this time, an adult was kneeling beside her, listening. Her mom found that page one night while tidying up. She didn't say anything. She just smoothed the corner where it was crumpled and left it open on the coffee table. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the state attorney general's office. They were launching a task force on youth and retail interactions, and they wanted her mom to serve on it. She accepted, but only on one condition, that the group include young people who'd lived through these experiences. They need to hear from the ones it happened to, she said, not just about them. The first meeting was held in a community center, not a government building. Teens sat at the same table as law enforcement leaders, store managers, and policy experts. The girl didn't speak much, but she listened. And when someone said, "Kids these days don't respect rules," she quietly said, "Or maybe they've learned that rules aren't applied fairly." The room went still. Then the head of the task force nodded. "That's exactly why you're here." As autumn settled in, the air grew crisper and the leaves turned gold and red. The girl started middle school. It was scary at first, new hallways, new faces, louder voices, but she carried her sketchbook like armor. And when a boy in her art class made a joke about getting arrested for looking at pencils, she didn't laugh. She looked him in the eye and said, "It's not funny if it's true." He didn't say it again. Her mom watched all of this with a mix of pride and protectiveness. She knew the world wouldn't always be kind. But she also knew her daughter was learning to meet it with truth, not fear. One evening, as they walked the dog after dinner, the girl asked, "Do you think we changed anything?" Her mom thought for a moment. "I think we opened a door. Whether it stays open, that's up to all of us." The girl nodded, kicking a pile of leaves. "Then I'll keep pushing." And in that simple sentence, was spoken under a street lamp, breath visible in the cool air, was the whole story. Not about punishment, not about blame, but about the quiet, stubborn work of making sure no child has to feel alone in a store again. Because change doesn't always come with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it starts with a sketchbook, a vote, a conversation, a child who finally says, "I was here. I mattered, and I won't be forgotten." Winter arrived not with a storm, but with a slow hush, the kind that settles over neighborhoods after the holidays, when the decorations come down and life returns to its ordinary rhythm. But this winter felt different. Not because of the cold, but because something had taken root. The ordinance was now law. Signs went up in stores across the city. All minors must be accompanied by a guardian during security inquiries. Training sessions rolled out for retail staff and patrol officers alike. At first, some grumbled, "Too much paperwork slows things down." But after a few weeks, even the skeptics noticed a shift. Fewer tense standoffs, more conversations, less fear. The girl didn't track the policy changes like her mom did. She noticed smaller things, like how the cashier at the corner bookstore now smiled and asked, "Drawing something new today?" when she came in. Or how the security guard at the library no longer followed her when she browsed the graphic novels. It wasn't dramatic. It was just normal. And that felt like a gift. At school, she'd been asked to join a student-led diversity committee. She hesitated at first. She wasn't the leader type. But then she remembered how it felt to be the only voice in a room full of silence. So she said yes. Their first project? A Stories That Matter wall in the hallway, where students could post anonymous notes about times they'd been misunderstood, judged, or seen for who they really were. The wall filled up in 2 days. One note read, "I wear hoodies because I'm cold, not because I'm hiding." Another, "My accent doesn't mean I don't belong here." And one, in careful handwriting, "I was scared to speak up, but now I am." She didn't write hers. She didn't need to. Everyone already knew. Her mom, meanwhile, had become something unexpected. A bridge, not just between police and the public, but between generations. She started hosting informal coffee mornings at the community center. No agenda, just space for parents, teens, and officers to talk. At first, only a few showed up, then more. Conversations were awkward at times, honest often, and sometimes painful. But they happened, and that was the point. One morning, a teenager sat down across from her, stirring sugar into his coffee for a full minute before speaking. "My little brother got stopped last month," he said quietly. "Just for walking home from the park." They asked him where he really lived, like he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. Her mom didn't offer platitudes. She just listened. Then she said, "What do you wish they'd done instead?" He thought about it, asked his name, called our mom, treated him like a person. She nodded. "That's what we're trying to build." Later that week, she brought the idea back to the task force. Create a youth advisory panel, not as a token gesture, but as equal partners in shaping how officers interact with kids. The proposal passed unanimously. The girl was invited to help design the first meeting. She suggested they hold it in a school gym, not a government office. That they serve pizza, not coffee. That everyone, cop or kid, had to share one time they'd been wrongfully accused. "So they remember how it feels," she explained. The officers who came weren't the ones from that day in the store. Those two had completed retraining and were quietly reassigned to traffic duty. No fanfare, no punishment, just a chance to learn. These were younger officers, many of them parents themselves, who wanted to do better. And they did. They listened. They apologized when they stumbled over words. They asked questions like, "How do we earn your trust?" instead of assuming they already had it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Back at home, life settled into a new kind of balance. Her mom still worked long hours, still carried the weight of her badge, but now she came home and asked, "What did you learn today?" as often as, "Did you finish your homework?" And the girl in turn started asking things like, "What's the hardest part of your job?" Not to challenge, but to understand. One snowy Saturday, they went to the art supply store together. Not the one from before, the new one downtown with wide aisles and friendly staff. The girl picked out new brushes, a set of charcoal pencils, and a thick pad of watercolor paper. At checkout, the cashier, a woman with silver-streaked hair and paint-splattered jeans, smiled. "You're the young artist, aren't you?" The girl blinked. "You know me?" "I read about you," the woman said gently. Not the bad part, the brave part. The girl didn't know what to say, so she just smiled and said thank you. On the drive home, snow dusting the windshield, her mom glanced over. "How did that feel?" "Strange," the girl admitted. "But good. Like maybe people see me for more than what happened." "That's because you've shown them who you are," her mom said, "not just what was done to you." As winter deepened, the task force released its first recommendations. Mandatory youth interaction training for all city officers. a ban on restraints for nonviolent minors under 12, and a hotline for families to report concerns without fear of retaliation. The mayor endorsed them all. But the real test came in March. A 12-year-old boy was accused of stealing a phone at a big electronics store. The loss prevention officer called the police, just like before. But this time, the responding officers didn't march in with hands on belts. They asked for the boy's name. They called his mom. They reviewed the footage together right there in the store and saw he'd never touched the phone. It had fallen into his backpack when he leaned against a display. Mistake? Yes, crisis? No, the store apologized. The boy's mom thanked the officers for listening. And later, she sent a message to the girl's mom. Because of what you did, my son came home with his dignity intact. That night, her mom showed the message to her daughter. They sat at the kitchen table, the glow of the phone lighting their faces. See? Her mom said softly. It's working. The girl nodded, but her eyes were distant. I just wish no one had to go through it at all. I know, her mom said. But since they do, we make sure it's not the end of their story. Spring arrived early that year. Buds pushed through bare branches. Kids traded jackets for hoodies, and the girl started a new project. Not for school, not for anyone else, just for herself. She began drawing portraits of people who'd shown her kindness. The teacher who believed her, the stranger who sent the art kit, the councilwoman who shared her grandson's story, even the cashier who remembered her name. She didn't show them to anyone at first, but one afternoon her mom found the stack on the dining table. She flipped through them slowly. Each face rendered with care, each expression full of quiet strength. These are beautiful, she said. They're just people, the girl replied. No, her mom said. They're proof that change is possible, one person at a time. A few weeks later, the community center asked if she'd display the portraits during a youth art night. She agreed, but only if they hung them next to blank frames labeled "Who's Next," so others could add names of people who'd stood up for them. The night of the event, the room buzzed with energy. Kids pointed to faces they recognized. Parents teared up seeing their own names written in careful script beneath a blank frame. An officer from the task force stood in front of one portrait for a long time, then quietly added a name. My daughter. She taught me to listen. The girl watched from the corner, sketchbook in hand, not drawing, just observing. Her mom joined her. You okay? She asked. Yeah, the girl said. It's just weird to see how one thing can turn into so many. Her mom smiled. That's how hope works. It spreads when you let it. Later that week, a letter came from the state education department. They wanted to include her story, carefully, respectfully, in a new curriculum about civic engagement and empathy. No names, no footage, just the lesson. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. And you're never too young to help change the world. She read it twice. Then she said, okay, but only if other kids' stories are included too. Her mom hugged her. That's exactly what I'd expect you to say. As the school year wound down, the girl was invited to speak at a regional youth leadership conference. She didn't want to talk about the incident again, so instead she talked about what came after. The listening, the drawing, the small acts of courage that don't make headlines but stitch communities back together. She ended with this. Being seen doesn't mean being famous. It means being believed. And that starts when we choose to see each other, not as problems but as people. Afterward, a boy about her age came up, eyes red. That happened to my sister, he said. No one listened, but I'm going to tell her your story, so she knows she's not alone. The girl didn't offer advice. She just handed him a blank postcard from her bag, one she always carried now, and said, write her a letter. Tell her you see her. He nodded, clutching it like a lifeline. On the drive home, the sun setting in streaks of pink and orange, her mom reached over and squeezed her knee. You're doing something important, you know. The girl looked out the window, watching the world blur past. I'm just trying to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. And that, her mom said softly, is the most human thing anyone can do. Because in the end, it was never about blame. It was about belonging, and slowly, quietly, they were building a world where every child, no matter their skin, their age, or how long they stood in an aisle, could walk into a store and simply be seen as they were. A kid, waiting for their mom, dreaming of what they might create next. A year had passed since that afternoon in the store. Not the kind of year that rushes by in a blur, but one that unfolded slowly, like a sketch filling in, line by careful line. The girl was taller now, her voice steadier, her hands more confident with a pencil. She still carried her sketchbook everywhere, but it wasn't just a shield anymore. It was a tool, a way to connect, to question, to imagine something better. Spring had returned full and bright. The city felt different, not because everything had changed, but because enough had. The ordinance was no longer just a policy on paper. It was part of the rhythm of daily life. Store managers trained new hires on it, officers referenced it in debriefs, and kids, without even knowing its name, walked into stores with a little more ease, as if the air itself had grown lighter. The girls' school had adopted a version of these stories that matter wall district-wide. Teachers used it as a starting point for conversations about fairness, assumptions, and the power of listening. One classroom even started a kindness ledger, not to track good deeds like points, but to remind everyone that small acts of seeing someone can echo far beyond the moment. Her mom had stepped back from the spotlight, but not from the work. She still attended task force meetings, still mentored younger officers, but now she also spent more evenings at home, helping with homework, watching terrible reality TV, or just sitting quietly with a cup of tea while her daughter drew at the kitchen table. The balance wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Then came an invitation neither of them expected. A national youth leadership summit asked the girl to co-lead a workshop on creating safe spaces for young voices. They wanted her not as a victim, but as a builder, as someone who'd turned pain into purpose without losing her gentleness. She hesitated. Public speaking still made her stomach twist. But this time she didn't say no right away. She asked her mom, "What if I mess up?" "You won't," her mom said. "But even if you do, it's okay. Truth doesn't need perfect words. It just needs honest ones." So she said yes. The summit was held in a sunlit convention center in another state. Teens from all over the country filled the rooms. Kids who'd organized food drives after hurricanes, started mental health clubs in rural towns, spoken up for immigrant classmates, or simply learned to love themselves in a world that told them not to. The girl felt small at first, surrounded by so much courage, but then she remembered, courage isn't about being loud. Sometimes it's about showing up when you're still scared. Her workshop was called When No One Believes You. She didn't rehash the store incident. Instead, she passed out blank paper and asked everyone to draw a time they'd been dismissed, ignored, or assumed guilty. No names, no explanations, just lines on a page. At first, silence. Then pencils moved. Shoulders relaxed. Tears fell quietly. When they shared, if they wanted to, the stories were raw and real. A boy told he talked too white. A girl accused of cheating just because she got a good grade. A non-binary teen asked to prove their identity before using the restroom. Afterward, a facilitator said, "This is the most honest room I've been in all week." The girl didn't take credit. She just said, "Maybe we all just needed someone to say it's okay to be seen." On the flight home, she stared out the window at the clouds below, thinking. Not about what she'd said, but about what she'd heard. She realized her story wasn't unique. It was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of kids trying to be heard, and that made it more important, not less. Back home, life settled again, but something had shifted inside her. She started volunteering at the community center, helping younger kids with art projects. She didn't call it mentoring. She called it drawing together. But the kids looked up to her. They asked questions. They trusted her. One afternoon, a shy 6-year-old tugged her sleeve. "Did you really get in trouble for looking at a book?" The girl knelt. "I got in trouble for being a kid who looked like me. But it wasn't my fault. And it's not yours either, okay? No matter what anyone says." The little girl nodded solemnly, then handed her a drawing. 2 girls holding hands, one with dark skin, one with light, standing under a rainbow made of crayon. "Best friends," she whispered. The older girl pinned it to the center's bulletin board, right next to her own portrait of the cashier who'd remembered her name. Meanwhile, her mom had been asked to speak at a police academy graduation, not as a captain but as a parent. She stood before rows of new officers in crisp uniforms, their faces young, hopeful, nervous. "I'm not here to tell you how to enforce the law," she began. "I'm here to ask you to remember who you're protecting. Behind every call, every report, every person you meet is a human being. Maybe a kid waiting for their mom. Maybe someone who's already been told they don't belong. Your job isn't just to keep order. It's to restore trust. She didn't mention her daughter by name, but everyone in that room knew the story. And when she finished, the applause wasn't just polite, it was personal. Later that week, a rookie officer stopped by their house, not in uniform, just as a neighbor. He'd been in that graduation class. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "Not just for the speech, but for showing us that accountability and care can go together." Her mom invited him in for lemonade. Her daughter brought out cookies. They talked about nothing important: weather, school, the stray cat that kept visiting their porch. But in that ordinary moment, something healing happened, a bridge built not with speeches, but with shared silence and sugar cookies. As summer approached, the girl received another letter, this time from a school in another state. A teacher had used the stories that matter idea in her classroom, and one of her students wrote a poem inspired by the girl's journey. The poem ended with, "You turned your hurt into a door. I walked through it." She read it 3 times. Then she taped it inside her sketchbook, right next to the first drawing she'd made after the incident, the one of her mom's hands. That same week, the city held its first annual Youth Voice Day, a celebration of student-led projects on justice, art, and community care. The girl helped organize it. There were booths, performances, and a mural painted live by local teens. In the center of the mural was a tree, roots labeled truth, listening, courage, and branches stretching wide, filled with hundreds of handprints in every shade. Her mom stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her daughter laugh with friends, explain the mural to curious visitors, hand out lemonade like it was the most important job in the world. She didn't feel proud in a loud way. She felt full, like her heart had grown room for all of it, the fear, the fight, the quiet joy of watching her child become exactly who she was meant to be. Later, as they walked home under streetlights just beginning to glow, the girl said, "Do you think we're done?" Her mom smiled. "We're never really done, but maybe we've done enough for now." Enough for what? For the next person to start where we left off. The girl thought about that. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I made something for you." Inside was a new drawing. Not of hands, not of stores, not of crowds. Just the 2 of them sitting on their porch at dusk, sketchbooks open, shoulders touching, above them stars just beginning to appear. In the corner she'd written, "We kept going. That's the miracle." Her mom held it close, blinking fast. "This is the best one yet." "No," the girl said softly. "It's just the truest." And in that truth, simple, human, unpolished, was everything. Not a perfect ending because real life doesn't have those, but a continuing. A promise that even when the world fails a child, that child can still rise not with anger as a weapon, but with empathy as a compass. Years from now, people might forget the name of the store, the names of the officers, even the exact words of the ordinance. But they'd remember the shift, the moment a city decided that a child's dignity was worth protecting. Not just when it was convenient, but always. And they'd remember the girl who, instead of letting fear define her, chose to draw a new world. One where every kid, no matter who they are or where they stand, is seen not as a threat, but as someone worth believing in. That night, back at home, the girl opened a fresh page in her sketchbook. She didn't know what she'd draw yet. Maybe the stars. Maybe the tree from the mural. Maybe nothing at all, just leave it blank for whatever came next because the story wasn't over. It never is. But now it belonged not just to her, but to everyone who'd been inspired to listen a little harder, question a little deeper and see a little more clearly. And that quiet, steady human was how real change grows. Not in explosions, but in echoes. Not in headlines, but in handprints. Not in perfection, but in the courage to keep going. One honest line at a time.